opening with his king's pawn. Wesley So was successful with this yesterday. He had 2 white games yesterday. The first one, he got a winning position. Yes, he ended up losing, but his opening was perfect. And in the second game with white, Wesley So, masterpiece. Yeah. Managed to completely outplay the world champion, didn't give the world champion a single chance in that game. So now it's up to Magnus Carlsen to maybe adapt his strategy, and he plays a move he didn't play yesterday against Wesley So, going for the Sicilian defense. Wesley So, he maybe gave away a secret yesterday in his interviews with us that he had borrowed lots of ideas from his online chessable course, Magnus Carlsen. He will have done his research overnight. And here we see one of the main lines of the Rossolimo Sicilian. Magnus Carlsen having had this earlier in the tournament as well against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Wesley So, Magnus Carlsen, both playing super quickly so far. They both studied this position this morning for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Magnus will have, at least this time, actually watched Wesley's course on 1e4, because Wesley, it wasn't just yesterday that Wesley managed to get in his surprises. It was also on day one and the very first game of this tournament that Wesley just outclassed Magnus using his repertoire that he advocates. So
Magnus, he'll surely have learned from those past mistakes, just not being prepared for Wesley So's fantastic arsenal of openings with white. It's out there in the public domain. Wesley, he's not been hiding his secrets. He's made it available for everyone to see. But Magnus now finally aware of that. And there we see him thinking.
Well, he did say yesterday, Magnus, because we did ask him about, well, these openings that Wesley's using, they're all out on Chessable. He's made a whole course about it. Why weren't you prepared for that? And he said that I need my get my team to look at that.
It was such a regal response.
Yeah.
I might not look at it, but someone else will, and they will soon let me know how it's going. Well, but Wesley was super impressive yesterday, I have to say, and I do think that the tweet from Mr. Dodgy sums it up. There you can see a picture of a cat and a snowstorm, and with the words Wesley, and they can see Magnus. It was really. It was really like that. And of course, if you want to send us your thoughts, suggestions, funny tweets, then please do tweet us using the hashtag #ChessChamps, and we'll feature them on the show.
Yeah, and we have, meanwhile, had a few moves. So the Sicilian defense is usually quite an aggressive opening for black. It shows that Magnus is in a fighting mood. It's a counter-attacking opening. You normally wait for white to expand in the center, and then you strike back a bit later on. But Wesley is taking a slower approach with white here. He's just improving his pieces. White now, look at that. The white king, super safe, has castled. White's rook stepping to the side there. Meanwhile, the black king is still in the middle of the board. It's still 3 or 4 moves away from getting over to safety. So Magnus Carlsen now, that's why he's thinking. He's just debating where the black king will be safest long term. Will he shift it over to the right? Will he shift it over to the left? Lots of questions here from Magnus Carlsen. He looks unfamiliar with the position again. It looks like he's been surprised by Wesley So's opening. Maybe Wesley So switching it up, playing something he hasn't tried before. If we bring up the analysis board, we can show maybe what Magnus is thinking about. Remember, openings are all about 3 things: piece development, controlling the center, and getting your king to safety. Here, black's piece development is okay on one side of the board, these pieces nicely placed. But this side of the board, his king, it normally wants to castle to the right. It's blocked in by this bishop, but this bishop is blocked in by this knight. So everything kind of getting in the way for Magnus. I expect him to start trying to correct that, bring his knight out, next move, bring his bishop out, and then get his king to safety. It's a bit of a long-winded plan, but he has to try it. We've seen his Magnus Carlsen, when he's under direct attack, when his king is under fire, that's when the blunders start to happen. So Magnus Carlsen, I expect him to see us to see this move from him, bringing his knight out of the way of his pieces. There's other choices. He could push in the center, but usually you don't want to open your position when your king is in the middle.
Well, we did have a few moments yesterday where you said this, David. Chess player wouldn't play this move. No, I shouldn't do that. And then Magnus just straight away made that move.
Yeah, I think I just caught him at a bad moment. I mean, he knows when to break the rules, when to follow them. But...
Yeah, but I do think it was very risky. You know, all the times that we called it. Okay, so he has actually moved his rook. So this wasn't an approach mentioned by David, but it's still very, very much in the realms of what we call theory, which basically means the position has been analysed and played before. So there's around about 200 games in this particular variation. And Wesley quickly strikes back with a pawn move on the left side. It's a side that we actually call in chess speak queen side, and he starts challenging Black's superiority there.
So we're talking about Magnus's team. He wants to put his team to work to look at Wesley's opening. We know he's got his coach, Peter Heine. He's got some seconds. What about Wesley? So does he have a big team like that around him, helping him?
Much less so than the world champion, than Magnus Carlsen. He does have some people he works with. I know he works with American Grandmaster Ray Robson, who they got to know each other, I think, at university. They work together from time to time. He has a couple of people that he works with. I know he had a longer-term coach, but he said that fizzled out a while ago, and I think he's more independent than the others, maybe.
So it's a little bit of a battle between Wesley So and Magnus Carlsen and his team.
Very much so. Yeah, Magnus definitely has more helpers than anyone else in the world, I think, especially when it comes to the opening stage. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, Wesley So, I mean, his approach so far has been working perfectly.
Yeah.
Whatever he's doing in his kind of home lab, cooking up these opening ideas, it's working.
And it's looking good already out from the opening here. I mean, the bar is already liking the white position here.
Yeah. What do you think, Jovanka? It looks pretty good for white right now with those central pawns.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a big fan of central pawns, and white has two in the middle, and that's amazing news for me because it just means that white has more space. But, you know, it's still very much the opening. The black king hasn't got castled yet, and it's still very flexible for black. Black hasn't kind of committed to making a pawn structure or pawn break. So, yeah, you can see that Wesley, in fact, develops the knight. And, in fact, there's only been one game played in this variation.
Yeah, so only one game in this variation. I think the reason it's so rare is because black has simply given up the centre to white. He said, OK, you take everything you want, you gain the space, I'm just going to let you push forward. And for me, this looks very risky for the world champion. These white pawns, super strong, they can choose to push forward at any moment. And Magnus Carlsen, he's really kind of playing with fire here at this early stage. He's brought his knight out to the edge of the board. We say that knights on the rim are dim. You don't want to put your knights on these bad squares usually, but the idea is to maybe open up the black rook along this line. Also, if the knight had stayed where it was, if black just develops, suddenly what black is going to get kicked around. This knight is going to get attacked anyway. So Magnus Carlsen just kind of predicting Wesley So's idea. And before the knight even gets attacked, he has moved it, opening up his rook, opening up his bishop. But I'm still worried about this black king sitting in the centre. It is being eyed up as well by white's rook along the same line. So the longer that happens, the longer that status quo is kept, the more black will start to feel uncomfortable. It's up to Wesley to start building up some attack somehow. If he can get his pieces, especially these pieces, into the game, then, yeah, I think white's position will start to become dominant. Yeah, still some chances, though, for Magnus Carlsen to unravel. It's all about timing. Can white whip up an attack, or will black's king kind of run away to safety first?
What do you guys think is the chances we'll have tie breaks today with the first match tied? And the style of these two players and how solid they are and how good they are. Do you think the chances are bigger for a tiebreak today, Jovanka, than not?
Yeah, I mean, judging by Magnus's track record, I'm going to go by that. I'm going to say there's very, very good chances of tie breaks. Yeah, but Magnus even took it as far as Armageddon. But Wesley has been super impressive. But, you know, they do have a solid style. But one thing is, something happens when these two play each other in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour, because we would expect it to be a very solid game, you know, all based on sophisticated moves and nuances, but somehow fireworks happen.
Right, yeah.
And we've seen a lot of decisive games. I remember in the Skilling Open, the first 6 games in their final were just decisive. And we saw Magnus winning, we saw Wesley striking back. I mean, that is totally unheard of, and especially with people who have such positional technical style. So I think chances are good. We're going to see, I think I'm going to call it and say we're going to see an Armageddon today.
Oh, yay.
That would be exciting. And you're right, Jovanka. Actually, I think in chess history, these two players, not only have they achieved some of the highest ratings in history, they've also got some of the longest unbeaten streaks. Magnus Carlsen going 125 games unbeaten in classical chess. I think Wesley So, he's been 60, 70 games unbeaten. But then something happens, when these two players face each other, they just want to fight and they both want to win. They both allow this kind of craziness, this chaos to happen on the board. And it's fantastic for us as viewers. Meanwhile, we do see a move. Wesley So just pushing a pawn forward. It looks like a very innocent move, but there's a very deep idea behind it. Maybe if we just bring up the board, we can see Wesley So. This looks mysterious. And at first, and I remember when I was learning the game, I used to think these pawn moves, why would you make them? But the whole idea is to control this black knight. It can now never jump forward to any of these squares. This knight dominated by this one pawn. And if Magnus Carlsen continues his plan, tries to castle his king, then we will see Harry the H-pawn, this corner pawn, rush up the board. This pawn will dislodge the black knight. And suddenly this black knight is regretting where it's sitting. It's only got one retreat square, and that is in the corner, the worst square on the board, pretty much. So this is Wesley So's plan. With this push, with this pawn push, he's just going to push his corner pawn up the board and attack this black knight.
Very sophisticated move there, David. I must admit, I just thought it was all about controlling the knight. I did not think about the aggressive undertones there of pushing the H-pawn. Beautiful move. Okay, so we're expecting, but Magnus has to start developing his pieces at some stage. He can't just sit there with the king in the middle of the board. He's
delayed it long enough, I think. The Black King really not looking too happy right now. He's done everything correct on that queen side you mentioned, on that left side of the board, but he needs to start developing pieces on the other side. That knight that I mentioned would be a target. This knight is just not looking happy right now. It's misplaced, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a very quick move here from Wesley.
Whoa.
There we go.
That is super quick. And you called it, David. He revealed his intentions immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Me and my arrows, forgive me. I'm sorry, sometimes I'm much worse with the mouse than these players are, for sure.
You're just making up new rules for the pieces here.
He's such a liar, When he plays on Chess24, he's like the highest rated player.
Are you, David?
Yeah.
Currently on the Chess24 leaderboard.
Wow.
Totally,
I play far too much online. I think if I played these guys, though, they would beat me down. They would crush me. But
So David Howell, the leader on Chess24?
On Blitz.
Wow.
But rapid chess now is a completely different kettle of fish, though. You have more time to think. It's less about the mouse skills, the mouse speed. But if we see the players go down to tie breaks later, it will come down to that kind of dexterity that they have.
We have seen Magnus mouse slip in this tournament, haven't we?
We've seen him twice in the whole tour. We saw him mouse slip against Rajabov in the very, very first game. No, not Rajabov.
Nepomniachtchi.
In the very, very first game, he completely threw away a winning position. And then we also saw him mouse slip against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
That's true.
And
in tie breaks, wasn't it?
It was
maybe
the day. The game before time breaks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Magnus Carlsen. He needs to have good mouse skills today, especially if it goes to tie breaks.
Yeah.
And he's ticking quite low on the clock already. Magnus Carlsen 5 minutes lower than Wesley. So if he gets under 1-2 minutes, then he will need those mouse skills. He'll need that speed of thought as well that he is quite famous for. We did see this yesterday, I should mention. Magnus Carlsen often playing catch-up on the clock, often getting much lower on the clock than Wesley in these opening stages. That's a big difference, I think, between the players. It's so hard from a practical point of view if in a complex middle game with so much going on, both sides trying to attack, if you have 5 minutes less than your opponent, that's a huge handicap. And Magnus Carlsen, it's uncharacteristic in a way. We're used to seeing him super fast, super confident. Wow, he has just given up a piece, Magnus Carlsen. He sacrificed a piece. That is a huge decision. He's just captured that pawn that I was highlighting, that white pawn pushing forward. But is it worth a bishop? I'm not so sure. Magnus Carlsen giving up a piece with his last move.
Wow.
Playing bishop takes pawn. He's trying to open up the white king side, but what do you think, Jovanka? Is that genius? Is that bluff?
Okay, well, we've got to be calm about this. We can't sit there and get excited about it. Okay, so it is a piece, but in return, he gets 2 pawns and an exposed king to attack. I don't think it's sufficient if I'm being super blunt. I really don't think that Black has enough compensation for the piece.
Yeah.
I would start trading off the pieces immediately. I wouldn't let that knight sit there.
Yeah.
And I would then just start moving all my pieces as quickly as possible to the aid of the king so I can kind of create some peace shelter. So risky.
Yeah, a huge decision by Magnus Carlsen. He's gambling at this early stage. If we bring up the board, we can see that Black has actually shattered the kind of protection, the shelter in front of White's king. White's pawns now have disappeared, but in the meantime, White has won a bishop, and it shouldn't be enough, though, because Black's only attacking with one piece. He's only got one piece in White's half of the board. Jovanka suggesting now trading off this attacking piece. Yes, you allow the Black Queen into the game, but you can easily bring pieces over to the defense of this king. And I would start by shifting the rook up, bringing this rook across. For example, if, I don't even see how Black attacks. He's only attacking with one piece. If Black castles, for example, if he castles the king, this rook will just step across, this rook keeping White's king perfectly safe. Next, the knight will jump across. As soon as you have a knight defending your king as well, you'll never, ever get checkmated. I just simply don't see what Magnus Carlsen will do if Wesley so trades this knight and brings his rook across. I think this is almost a winning advantage for White. Wow. The extra piece is going to be much better than the two pawns.
Is it Magnus here taking a risk to try to surprise and bring sort of Wesley out of his confidence, maybe, or is it simply a little blunder by Magnus here that could cost him the game?
Yeah, it's not a blunder. I think maybe just a misjudgment. And he did say in his interview with us yesterday, Magnus Carlsen, that he was going to try and be a bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
He was tired of the one always being attacked, being chased. He wants to be the attacker, and that's why Magnus sacrificed that piece. But it feels like the wrong moment. You look at Black's pieces on the left side of the board, that knight, that bishop, they're not going to help the attack on the other flank. Mm-hmm. It does feel a bit too speculative. It just feels maybe like the wrong moment. But potentially the reason is he just didn't like his position. He didn't want to sit there cramped with no space. He'd rather just give up a piece and break free. It's more psychological, the pressure here, than on the board, at least.
And we do see, at least he's forcing Wesley so to take a long pause to think here. And that's important as well, because Magnus is down to 8 minutes on the clock. Mm-hmm. So I guess he needs to have Wesley thinking as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. He wants to put Wesley under pressure, but I do agree with David. It's all about feeling the pressure, because Wesley has just been coming at him with the white pieces and has just seemed absolutely unbreakable. And, they do say desperate times call for desperate measures, and now we're seeing it. And so Wesley is taking the knight and has indeed done the defensive rook lift that David wanted to do. And look at it. The rook, it's just really instructive here, actually, how Wesley's pieces are now going to start readjusting themselves just to protect the king. And now it's all about consolidating the position, killing the life from the position, and just using that extra piece to win in an endgame.
Yep. And usually an attack will not work if you have fewer attackers than there are defenders. That's why Wesley, he's going to bring his rook across to defend. He's going to bring his knight across to defend. White will have at least 3 defensive pieces. Black is only attacking with the queen. That queen looking a bit lonely out there, the Black Queen. Just no backup, no support. I simply do not see how Magnus Carlsen is going to whip up an attack while his own Black King is in the centre, blocking the coordination between his rooks, while his knight is offside there, the Black Knight, not really helping out.
So judging from this opening, I know it's super early to call. Do you think we are going to get to, as Mr. Hot Tub tweeted, a picture of Armageddon? This is what we all want to see.
That was a fun movie, I remember. And Armageddon chess. You never know. This game, despite the fact White has a big advantage. White has this extra bishop right now. Despite that, there are still going to be twists and turns ahead, I feel. With a weak king in rapid chess, you're never going to be completely secure, fully comfortable. So Wesley, if he just slips up with one move, Magnus's attack might suddenly grow. And here we do see Magnus pushing with his pawn. There's actually a trap in the position. There's a checkmate in 1 if Wesley plays the wrong move. He will not play that, though. If we bring up the analysis board, we can see White just swinging his rook across. this is the move I was kind of advocating for Wesley. This rook keeps the king super safe now. White's king feels very comfortable behind this rook. But if he had got greedy, and this is why greed is sometimes not good, pawn takes pawn, you should always look for checks in the position. And black would actually drop his queen down, suddenly giving checkmate because the bishop is defending this queen and white's king is suddenly trapped. So you should not get greedy here. You should not allow this bishop to open itself. You want to keep it blocked. That's why Wesley keeps his pawn on this square, brings his rook across first. Magnus can actually win a pawn right now. He can win a pawn back. So now a bishop for 3 pawns. It's roughly balanced material, but I think Wesley has the simple idea, pushing his rook forward, kicking away the black queen. Suddenly his pieces are going to start entering the game. White's bishop's unleashed. As soon as the pieces come to life, White is going to win. And Magnus Carlsen, he has a big dilemma now. What to do with black? How do you keep the momentum going? How do you keep pedaling and throwing more firewood on the attack? I mean, it's just, it's difficult for Magnus.
He is thinking again, and we know, you said it before the game started, David. It's all about the end game for Magnus. He needs to be in the end game to get out his best. Should we expect him to try to get those queens off?
Well, unfortunately, not here, because he has rolled the dice and just gone for broke right at the minute. And when he is a piece down, there is no way that Magnus wants to be in an endgame with the queens off the board. He wants to be attacking Wesley full throttle. It's like begin at the beginning and carry on until you stop. And that's exactly what Magnus is going to do. But you could just see Wesley, ever the cool customer, just starts playing very, very instructively. He starts transferring his pieces to the right side. It's the side that we call king side, and he's attacked the queen, and the queen has just moved. And now it's over to Wesley to find a resolution to his problems, because he does have some problems. He has to deal with a potential attack.
Yep, so Wesley does still maybe feel under some pressure. Black's queen still quite near the white king. And on that king side, there's a lot of tension right now. Black's bishop as well, kind of spying from afar along the best diagonal for that bishop. So Wesley, when you're facing an attack, this is a tip I give everyone, always look for those queen trades. If the queens disappear from the board, then your king will feel very safe. And here, I know Magnus Carlsen likes his endgames, but Wesley's king is the weaker of the two. So I would try and get the queens off the board with white. If we bring up the analysis board, we can see maybe one idea for Wesley would just be to move this knight out of the way. It's doing a great job right now, but if you bring it forward, suddenly the queens are looking at each other. And if the queens disappear, okay, black can maybe grab a pawn in the middle of the board, but he's also got pawns that are loose in his camp, white's knight threatening pawns. But I think the simple fact of the matter is these bishops, long term, they will be better than black's pawns. And yeah, I think Wesley So's material advantage is just decisive here. If he brings his knight forward, the problem for Magnus is what else to do with the queen. If you move it, I think white's bishop would just jump out, even trapping this queen. And
yeah, that would be a dismal end to the opening game of day 2. No, we don't want that. I mean, I agree with you. I think then Magnus is perhaps forced to take his chances in an endgame, and that is going to be such a hard job. Yeah. I mean, Wesley has just been ruthless. I mean, it really does make you fall in love with chess. Good link in. And that brings me nicely on to the quiz of the day. We are asking everyone at home, at what moment did you fall in love with chess? And for Antoine Zogby, he said, in a pandemic world, I fell in love with chess. In a world that is full of uncertainty, chess provided me a corner of certainty. Very nice. Very nice. It's true. It's true. Very. But OK, so we've seen some progress, David, and the fortune teller, I should call you that. Crystal ball is working its magic.
Yeah, I'm getting very lucky with my guesses today. Maybe I should go buy a lottery ticket or something. But yeah, I mean, the players, they have followed that line that I mentioned. White did jump forward with his knight into the middle of the board. And Magnus said, OK, actually, I can't run away with the queens right now. I can't keep the queens on the board. So we are heading towards that endgame that Magnus is famous for. But normally, he's famous for endgames where he starts from a position of strength, where he has very solid pieces, very solid pawn structure, where he can slowly press forward and outmaneuver his opponents later on, where his accuracy levels will just be the decisive factor. But here, Black, remember, still a piece down for only 2 pawns. It's not quite enough. And no matter how accurate he is, I think with best play, if Wesley doesn't blunder, if Wesley doesn't allow some kind of sudden attack, then white is the one in charge. There we see the white knight does step back. The white knight forced to retreat. But if black captures a pawn now in the center, white's knight is going to grab a pawn on that left side.
Yeah, he's tricky customer, isn't it? You know, he's kind of saying, yes, take the central pawn, but in return, I will grab your pawn that I'm attacking with the knight. And once again, Magnus will be 2 pawns for a piece down. And that is not a good sell, to be honest.
Yeah, normally... it's not a huge material disadvantage. You're only technically 1 point down if you have 2 pawns for a piece. But if you don't have something else in return, if you don't have a long-term strategic idea, or if your opponent's king isn't a bit weak, if you don't have an attack as well as those 2 pawns, then often the opponent's piece is the decisive factor. And here, none of black's pawns are too impressive. None of black's pawns are too strong, racing down the board. Here we see, okay, black capturing a pawn, white's knight. Yeah, I mean, recapturing
knight
one.
Just captures the pawn. I mean, you know, it's quite funny that you say that about 2 pawns. My understanding is that it's even applicable to 3 pawns.
Exactly.
That a piece actually is worth slightly more than 3 pawns. But so if you have the pawns, you have to have something more. You have to have an exposed king. You have to have a very far advanced pawns. They just cannot be backward, and very, very good pieces. It just has to have that little bit extra. 3 pawns by themselves, not enough. And the sad fact of the matter is Magnus has just got 2. And this means that Wesley So now has an extra piece to start an attack. At the minute, there aren't too many targets, but if Wesley starts creating those points of weakness, then that is it. That extra piece will be fatal. I'm just loving Wesley's position. And it seems so easy. I mean, it just seems like Magnus just kind of self-combusted.
Yeah. Do you think Magnus right now, is he regretting that decision to sacrifice his bishop? I mean, that felt like the turning point, right? That maybe made Wesley's life a bit easier.
But it just came from nowhere. That was the thing. Wesley played some normal opening line, threatened one thing, and suddenly we saw a gross overreaction, and Magnus is lost. Yeah. I mean, this is the importance of good opening preparation. And for those of you who do actually want to sample Wesley So's course, you can actually you can go to the Chessable website and you can actually have a short summary for free, and just check it out.
Yeah, I mean, if Wesley's openings are beating world champions so consistently with white, then they're definitely worth checking out.
But the beauty of it all is that Wesley actually said that his opening repertoire wasn't aimed at defeating world champions. It was aimed for people who were much, much lower.
Is that actually embarrassing for Magnus?
Yeah, slightly.
A little bit?
Slightly, yeah. Or
for his team, then, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's less so for Magnus because obviously he still has to prepare for every opening there is, and it's hard to memorize everything, but... somehow something needs to change. He needs to cause that surprise, or he needs to find a hole in Wesley's analysis. But so far, it's not looking that way. Wesley in firm control. Look at that. White pushing a pawn there in the corner. Black pushing in the center, meanwhile. But look at the black bishop suddenly. Black's remaining bishop. It's just blocked in by all of its pawns. So not only is black a piece down for 2 pawns, but his remaining pieces, especially the black bishop, just not looking good. They're not good enough.
Not looking good. OK, but is there any hope? Let's not be too all doom and gloom for poor Magnus. Is there any chances for Magnus to save the day? Because we are talking about survival now. Yeah,
so it's all about survival for Magnus Carlsen. But meanwhile, with Wesley's last move, bring the bishop out, there's a huge threat. Bishop takes pawn, check. This would be check and attacking the rook. So not only would a pawn drop off, but that would be a double attack. So the first step of survival, you've got to defend that pawn. What do you think he should be aiming for long-term, Magnus Carlsen, Jovanka? How is he going to hold this one if white simply starts maybe kicking away this knight, bringing out this bishop later on?
Blunder. Wait and hope for the mistake. The mistake will come. There will be at some point where Wesley is slightly inaccurate, and you can see the bishop has now being developed and is now attacking the rook. So now there's just no chance, really. I mean, you just have to move the rook.
I think it's actually game over. I mean, if Magnus Carlsen retreats this rook, this pawn will drop with a double attack. If he just shifts it across one square, which he has done, the rook's just trapped. Look at this. The rook is trapped. It has to give itself up for a bishop. It has done. But now Wesley So is a whole rook up for only, 2 pawns?
Yeah.
I mean, rook for 2 pawns. Magnus Carlsen just resigns.
Wow.
Over so suddenly.
Wow. What a dramatic start to the final day of the Opera Euro Rapid, the second match in the final. Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, loses the first game. And you can look on just leaning back in his chair. It's not an explosive reaction like we've seen before, but he's clearly not happy. And this really puts the pressure on Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah, totally puts the pressure on. I mean, Wesley was so impressive. I mean, how many moves was that? 20.